For allowing me to come here today. It's a pleasure to visit with you. It's an interesting reminder of how fast time flies as I look out, because you get this mental image of what college is like. Kind of stays that way for the rest of your life. I come back and see young faces and realize that's not blonde hair in my head anymore. It's gray. Let me talk just a couple little anecdotes, I guess, before we get into this. For the ladies in the audience, you'll appreciate this. I'm a second-generation BYU alumni. My mother attended BYU back in the 1950s when it was called Brigham Young Academy. She attended a course which no longer exists called Home Economics. There was a Mrs. Bowman that taught that course. Oh, my mother, who's here in the front row, won't mind my saying this, but she flunked the course, dropped out. She moves to San Jose, California, which is where I'm from, meets my father, fall in love. She goes to meet her future mother-in-law. Guess who it was? It's a great introduction. So if you're worried about mother-in-law stories, my mom's got one that can beat you. So by show of hands, how many of you are planning on or have already started your own e-business? Wow, that's awesome. Probably 30% of the class already. I'm assuming then the rest of you, since you're here, have an interest in joining some kind of e-business upon graduation. Is that kind of a fair assessment? All right. What we're going to talk about today are some key issues that will help you determine in the building of your own e-business or as you are being recruited by e-businesses if they're going to be around in a couple of months. These are interesting times. I don't think I need to tell any of you that we are in a very interesting economic circumstance. Just this morning, I was reading on Twitter how Silicon Valley is going through massive layoffs right now. Big companies, Facebook, things of that nature, they're laying people off. So let's go through and talk about some things that will hopefully give you some insights into the industry and what's going on. Now, how many of you understand what the tool set is for Web 2.0? Can there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hands. All right, let's talk about that a little bit. In general, the tool set is listed up there on the right-hand side of the screen. Widgets, podcasting, mashups, wikis, blogs, RSS feeds, and social networking today constitute the Web 2.0 umbrella. Now, in terms of the market for that, I want to give you an idea. Now, this is a report by Forrester, one of the leading research firms out there. They believe that in 2008, before the stock market disappeared on us, that it is going to be about a $764 million market. Now, it's okay for an upstart market, but to contrast this to other kinds of e-business markets, the e-learning market is right now a $33 billion industry, just to put this into perspective. They anticipate that this will grow over time to about a $4.6 billion market. Now, it's interesting because you take a look based upon this research as to where corporations plan on spending money. Now, again, this is an enterprise play. We're not talking B2C. But for the most part, social networking is taking the lead by far. This is not surprising, I think, to most, because as you look at the number of companies that are out there, the number of companies that are offering some kind of a social platform to companies is the largest category right now. Rather than go into all of the virtues of Web 2.0, I'm assuming that most of you already know the applications of these tools. At least that's my hope for most of you, because I prepared to kind of go beyond that in discussing some of the things you need to be aware of. So if you're not, I do recommend going out, doing a little research, because there is a great deal of information on the value that every single one of those bring, how they're being used and whatnot, but we're not going to talk about that too much today. When I was graduating from MBA school back in the year 2000, most of you were probably in middle or elementary school back then, we were in the height of the dot-com boom. And all throughout MBA school, they were flying in all kinds of people from Silicon Valley doing exactly what I'm doing today. These were CEOs and high-level professionals of all these great dot-com companies that were worth millions. 9 months later, those companies were broke and all those people were out of a job. So in doing that, if we're going to have a discussion about the feasibility of Web 2.0 as a business platform, something you can use to build your own company or something that a company you wish to join is going to use, let's first spend just a few minutes talking about the lessons of the dot-com crash 8 years ago. There were a number of lessons, and the reason I want to bring this up is that I just came back within the last month. I went to the Web 2.0 Expo in New York back in September of this year, and it amazes me how many of those companies did not learn these lessons, and they will fail, and we'll talk about why in just a little bit. Some of the lessons were, one, there was an awful lot of innovation and wow factor in the technology itself, but a fundamental problem was that those companies, and many today, they create the technology and then they desperately try to find a use for it. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, they're all having the same problem. They're having a very difficult time identifying a legitimate revenue model that's beyond just the ad revenue model, which is very old and has a problem that I'll talk about in just a second. A lot of them were able or failed to monetize the idea. Some of them grew way too fast. You're looking from startup to $100 million within 18 months. That's too fast. Companies cannot handle that kind of growth. And the example here, I don't know if how many of you remember this from when you were quite a bit younger, but did any of you recognize this little guy here? Some? Okay, well, I see a lot of guy hands. They did a huge campaign in the year 2000 in the Super Bowl. Multi-million-dollar ad campaign. They're all over the place. They even went so far as to create a balloon for the Macy's Day Parade at the Thanksgiving time. That's what's kind of made them the most famous. Let me tell you a little bit about them. The challenge, or what they did, their business proposition, was that you could go online, buy pet food and pet supplies, and have it shipped to your house. Well, that sounds okay in theory, but the problem they experienced was that there was at least a 2-day turnaround time on the delivery of it. And let's face it, if you're ordering kitty litter, you need kitty litter now. You don't want to wait 2 days before it comes, otherwise you have a mess on your hands. The other problem was that in order to be competitive, they had to actually subsidize the shipping costs. They were actually losing money for every product they sold. Not that great of a business model. In February of 2007, right about the time I was wrapping up my graduate studies, they did an IPO. They raised $82.5 million. That's a big chunk of change. 9 months later, they were gone. The money was spent, blown, everyone was laid off, the company didn't exist anymore. Next. At the time, we thought the infrastructure could support this kind of e-business growth because compared to the late 90s, there was exponential growth in the number of people that were using computers, the people that were starting to get DSL, the people that were using the internet. But in hindsight, I think many would agree the infrastructure just wasn't quite there yet, and that's one of the things you obviously need to take a look at. If you're going to do an online business, you have to take a look at the market. How many people actually have internet access, and what are their usage trends within that market? So in August of 2007, there were only, I can say only, 54 million households, or 51% of the market in the United States, had one or more computers. But only 42% of those actually had internet access, and of that, only 1 in 3 adults use the internet at home. Now, most of you are probably too young to even remember what the dial-up modem was like, but it's archaic, it's slow. Only 2 in 10 homes back then were using DSL access. So this was a painfully slow process. That's not inherently good for an e-business if all of your customers are using it in a very slow manner. To give you a point of reference today, there are over 1.4 billion households today that have internet access worldwide. Verizon just released a report where they indicated that more than 75% of American households have access to the internet and have access to at least 2 different broadband platforms. Big difference in just 8 years. The next thing we need to take a look at in drawing lessons upon 8 years ago is how are people actually using the internet? we all had the arrogance back then that innovation would drive the change in the market, that these great new ideas would cause people to change their usage patterns. That didn't end up being the case, unfortunately. As you take a look, most of the people, that top line there, 87% of the time people were using the internet is to check their email. Out of curiosity, how many of you in here prefer to use social networks instead of email to communicate? Is your preference? Really, that's not as many as I thought there would be. I thought it would be a bigger percentage of that. The next biggest category was information search. And remember, this is pre-Google. Yahoo was king back then. One of the lessons to draw upon here is that one of the other challenges that we had then and now is that a lot of these technologists get really wrapped up in the technology that they're selling or that they're building. And what they try and do is put something out there that's really bleeding edge. It's a pride issue. I'm with a company. We're on the bleeding edge. We're being written about right now by Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and it's fun being there. But the problem is, when you build your technology, it needs to be something that mainstream users are going to be able to use. In other words, it can be bleeding edge, but the interface is going to be really simple. The mainstream consumer has to be able to use it without this huge learning curve. And that was one of the problems that we had then and now, is that the early adopters, you all know what the early adopters are with the life cycle of product development. The early adopters are the ones that they have Macs, they have the latest handhelds, they eat and breathe technology. The extreme ones even read Wired magazine for fun. They're only a certain percentage of the market. They only have so much pocket share. The main money is with the mainstream buyers that come after that. And if your technology is so innovative and so creative that the mainstream buyer, the purchasing agent for IBM, can't figure out how to use your technology to a business value, you're going to have a very short life cycle. So that's something to watch out for in your own development as well as any company that you might be working for. Let's contrast that with what's going on today in terms of internet usage patterns. You notice this category up here, it says quite clearly, this is the social networking, the social connections, third point down. That didn't even exist 3 years ago. It's a brand new category. And yet look how it's being used now. There's some interesting data on this that I wanted to point out. Look at the top one that is 6%. 6% represents those that are actually using the internet for work, business, and education. Only 6%. The rest of it's social. So where's the pendulum gone? The pendulum has gone very heavily over to the consumer side of things. Well, like any pendulum, it's bound to come back more towards the enterprise application. Now, again, going back, kind of aging myself here, back in the 80s when Bill Gates decided to release the source code for DOS, overnight there was this explosion, and companies like MediaPlay, which I'm not sure exists anymore, came out with hundreds of applications for their personal computer. Most of them started off as games. It was once some of that technology was more readily adopted that we started to see the advent of more business applications. I remember what a big deal it was when WordPerfect was launched, and all of a sudden you had this really user-friendly, for those days, a way to be able to process Word applications. And I remember when I was going to my undergraduate degree here, there were a number of people that would first longhand their essays on a yellow pad and then type it in like a typewriter. The whole transition to using a word processor as a word processor was difficult. But those are really revolutionary times. The Lotus 123 came out with the Excel spreadsheet. We were learning all about that here at BYU and what a revolutionary new tool it was and what it was going to do for business. Now, for the most part, you take someone's computer away, productivity comes to a complete stop. We don't know how to do business anymore without the internet. So we've shifted very heavily to the consumer side. And even from the year 2000, I won't talk go back and forth. Just note that the work and education segments in 2000 went from 24 and 34% respectively to combined to only 6% right now. We're about to see a shift. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the lessons from the past. Again, I contemplated whether or not I wanted to even include this in the lecture today, but I think it's really important because as I was reading just this morning, as I was finishing up my notes on this, Jerry Owang, who's a huge proponent of Web 2.0, he's from Forrester research firm, he was talking about the lessons from the past. And his topics were completely different arena than what I have up here. When I was at Web 2.0 Expo, and this is just information that's 30 days old is all, there were over 90 different social enterprise companies there, or providers, that were selling social communities. When I was doing an interview with this gentleman from Marketing Profs, the conversation came up. Almost every single one of those companies are going to go out of business the moment Google decides to release enterprise building tools for free. Well, why won't they? They did it with web analytics. See how that changed that industry. So I thought they were very important lessons to bring up, because what we're next going to talk about are some of the things that go into making Web 2.0 a sound business platform. This is one of the things that makes my company different from some of the others. When some of my competition just announced this morning they're doing a 33% layoff of their firm, I'm on the process of quadrupling my income this year. And we were just named one of the hot new companies of the year. So these simple things, the basics, make a big difference when you're trying to do. Okay, so the fundamental question is Web 2.0 a sound business platform now that I've raised all this doubt? The answer is yes, most definitely, when you use it correctly. Now, the second thing is a lot can be done with Web 2.0. My purpose here today is not to educate you on all the things you can do with it. Your imaginations, I'm sure, are a lot better than mine. Rather, what I want to do is talk about what we should be looking at tomorrow. At a minimum, you guys are a year from graduation. The economy is going to look very different in a year than it does right now. You're going to be entering a very interesting time of our economy in the history of our country. So the things you need to be looking at are different than what people are focusing on today, because what's hot today is dying very, very quickly. So let's take a look at what's coming up tomorrow. And the only caveat I have in all of this is that, you know, you talk to 4 different people who are quote-unquote experts in this field, you're going to get 4 very different opinions. My focus and my expertise lies in the arena of enterprise B2B. I don't do any BDC plays. I never have. You know, if you're going to do a pure play, and a pure play is defined as what? Anyone know that answer? Meaning you're not a brick-and-mortar company using Web 2.0 tools for marketing and consumer relations. Rather, you're a company like mine, a pure play, where my service is a software that I sell online. It's SaaS. So I'm a pure play, just to make the distinction between the two. Okay, let's shift gears here. You've all seen the headlines, or rather, I hope you have seen the headlines. I just pulled these off the web within the last 24 hours. These online companies, I mean, they're getting venture capital, hand over fist, multi-million-dollar subsidy deals. Microsoft bought less than 2% ownership in Facebook for, how much was it? $240 million. A 2% ownership or stake in that company for a couple $100 million. They're getting a lot of money that way, but what they're not doing is getting money from customers. They're still struggling with this whole revenue model. What do we do? And what they're leaning towards is a flawed system of this whole ad revenue model. Now, there's a lot of discussion out there, and if you follow this at all, there's a huge discussion on the whole ad revenue, how it's a legitimate approach, but we'll talk about that a little bit. There's some huge problems with that. One of the reasons why companies are starting to look more towards enterprise applications of it is that I got a quote here from Adam Sarner, who was a research analyst for Gartner. And in the last 30 days, he indicated that 75% of the Fortune 100 have already made some kind of initiative in the social media arena. 50% of those are going to be classified as a failure within the next quarter. The reason being is that they're not doing it right. They're caught up in the hype, just like we were back in the dot-com rush, where everybody had to have a website. Again, you guys were fairly young at the time, but it wasn't that long ago that this whole concept of having a corporate website, you had to have it or you were a nobody. And it presented a whole new opportunities, because a person working out of their basement could put up this fabulous website that looked like you were a Fortune 100 company. And we all kind of grew up and evolved through that. But there was a mad dash back in those days, and where all of a sudden these companies that could create websites were popping up all over the place and making a killing on it. because every company had to have a corporate website. That's kind of where we're today with the social media and Web 2.0. Everybody feels like they're going to be left out of the conversation. But with the stock market crash, everybody's taking a hard look at what's really deriving value to my company. And it ain't social media. So, some of the challenges that they're having. Some of the things that you need to be aware of as we go through identify what are the key things that we need to be doing in making sure that Web 2.0 is an actual good business platform, and how we compete in a terrible market and thrive when others are laying people off. Regardless if it's your own company and you're partnering up with a buddy who's drafting the code, or you're going to work for a company, make sure the code is standards-based. One of the lessons we learned is that those who did not have a standards-based code, they couldn't scale. They have shackles around their ankles right now. And as they became successful, it was too laborious to scale, meaning, and I'll get into the definition a little bit later, but the ability to handle a large volume of new clients of differing sizes. I mean, very difficult. The other challenge you're going to have is that if your company is successful, you're going to be replacing your competition. And if you don't have a standards-based code, one of the things your customers are going to want from you, and it can be a deal killer, is the ability to import all of the data they have in the competing system that you are replacing. A standards-based system will allow you to do that quickly and easily. So quickly that you can even offer it for free in some cases. If not, you may not even be able to do any kind of import of data whatsoever. So that'll make a big change. Some of the standards that are out there that you want to become very familiar with is called service-oriented architecture. I've thrown up the two that are most common up there, Sun Microsystems and Oracle's WebLogic. Sun Microsystems does seem to be a little bit more popular right now. But the main thing is, what standards are they using behind the code? I realize most of you are not programmers, but if you're going to be recruited by a company or you're going to start your own company, this should be one of the questions you have during the interview. Is what kind of standards base are they using for their code? If they look at you with glossy eye, have no idea what you're talking about, move on. Because you're going to be out of business pretty quickly. Next one, something that you all should also be aware of is making sure that the platform language that's being used has enough flexibility to be able to meet the demands of the consumer. Now, you guys know as well as I do that consumers today are a lot more picky and demanding than they were before, in part due to the internet. Well, here are some of the hot languages, and the hottest one right now is Ajax. I'm not here to tell you all about the programming languages that are out there, but as you ask questions, what kind of programming languages are they using? If they're doing anything in the Web 2.0 world, they should be using these types of codes up here. It provides for tremendous amounts of flexibility, particularly if you're going to do a B2B approach and you're selling solutions to enterprises. This kind of technology, these programming languages, will give you the flexibility that will allow you to be able to interface with existing and legacy systems that the enterprise has. One of the demands that I get every time I close a deal. The next thing is the ability to scale. Now let's talk about that. Who can give me a definition of scalability with the enterprise software? What does that mean? Nobody?
Ability to handle orders of magnitude more volume of transactions.
Part, yep. Any other thoughts?
Ability to multiply your output without multiplying your input.
That's a very good collegiate answer. I like that. Back here. Yeah. From a street perspective, meaning when you get out in the workforce, here's what people are talking about when it means scalability. One, it means more than simply the ability to be able to add more users. It's considerably more than just that. It does imply having the back-end flexibility to be able to support a growing system. One of the challenges that softwares have is that they got this great architecture, but it really runs into snags and slows down if there's too many users, too much content, or things of that nature. So if you're really successful and you go out there and you start landing Fortune 1000 companies and they've got 80,000 employees, if your system can't handle it and you're stuck with the smaller businesses, that's a whole different business model, and it creates all kinds of problems for you. Plus, one of the other things that typically is defined as scalability is the ability to delegate the administrative functions at a lower level. So one of the customers that I'm working with right now is MGM. They have 80,000 employees. That's bigger than Microsoft. You don't want to have just a single administrator interface, because if that were the case, one person is going to have to be dealing with 80,000 employees. That's too much for one person. You need the ability to delegate so that department heads, group leaders are able to administer user access rights, content management, and anything else that's particular to the solution that your company has developed at a more local level, with the IT department and the CTO being able to have control over the whole beehive. But you need that flexibility, and that's one of the things that frequently gets forgotten when you're in the discussion process. Plus, from a competitive standpoint, when you're in a tight competition, the ability to talk at this level can and will make the difference between closing the deal or walking away empty-handed. Okay, another piece of scalability that's really important is the ability to be able to implement the system over a timely manner for even large applications. Now, the company you work for may have a different business strategy. They may be solely focusing on small to medium-sized companies. Well, that's great, and it's a very viable business model. But if you're going after large enterprise deals, they no longer have the patience for the SAPs of the world and some of these others that can and do take a full year to get something up and running. I'm working with a customer right now. They are an HR consulting company, and they have most of the Global 500 as their customers. Their previous attempt took 12 months to deploy it, because what we do has been productized. They had to pick their job off the floor when I said, well, we can have it configured in about 2 weeks. In all honesty, we really can. I wasn't just being a salesman. I really meant what I said. Last thing, when it comes to the whole scalability, is and someone back here brought it up. You have to consider that large organizations have multiple departments. Each of those departments are going to be an entity in and of themselves. They have their own needs. They're going to integrate with their own software applications. A system to be truly scalable needs to be able to help local departments set up their own user access rights, set up their own permissions, allow them to integrate with third-party applications without messing up anybody else. Does that make sense? So you have subsystems within the entire system, and that's one of the elements very critical to a B2B play if you're going to be successful. We just talked about this a little bit, the ability to integrate with third-party and legacy systems. Someone up here brought that up. This notion, particularly at the enterprise level, the ability to integrate is extremely important, because they have all these systems from their perspective. They have spent sometimes millions of dollars on the software. They don't want to have islands of data. They don't want to have islands of information. They want to be able to pull things together so that they're all starting to work seamlessly. And this, coincidentally, is kind of the genesis of Web 3.0, one of the things that you should be getting to know. Web 2.0 may be dead by the time you graduate. Web 3.0 is on the way. It's already being defined. There's an argument over who actually coined it, but it's there, and the genesis of it has already started. So the ability to integrate Active Directory, that's one that's, I put it out there because that's the most common. Who here knows what Active Directory is? Yes, I'd like to see more hands. For those of you who didn't raise your hand, it's just a tool wherein administrators are able to do all the user access rights. So user profiles, emails, passwords, all that stuff is in there. And if you have the ability to integrate with it, you're able to go in and extract all of that data on user access rights, their login, their password, and pull it into your system so it's not a manual process. This is one of the little things that are out there. As a sidebar, something else. Another question that will make you look very intelligent and you're going through the interview process is ask them, what is the data backend or the database backend of their system? Oracle used to be the king of the hill. They've kind of been thrown off the mountain a little bit by Microsoft SQL Server, simply because Microsoft SQL Server is less expensive and it's a lot easier to work with. The nice thing about Microsoft SQL Server is that it's an incredible relational database that captures everything. And because they have these built-in reporting services, you're able to go out and generate great user data. And as a manager, one of the things that you want is actionable data that I can print off really quickly. The SQL Server backend makes a big difference, and that's one of the things that we use at my company. Let's talk about configuration just a little bit. And then there's a couple business models that I would want to be aware of if I were in your shoes about to enter the market. The ability to configure is different fundamentally from the ability to customize an application. Excuse me. Who can define the difference for me? What's the difference between customizing an application and configuring an application? And it's not just semantics. Yes?
Well, it's code changes versus just tweaking settings.
Yes. Did you all hear that? Customization is code changes. Configuration is changing settings. What's the implication of that? What's the big deal?
Well, changing configuration is a simple thing. Code means you have to rebuild and redeploy.
Right. And what happens to all your customizations when the next version release comes out?
They're gone.
Right. And the customer has to spend a lot of money to rebuild what they already had. Customizations are a nasty word in the enterprise world. Configurability is an important one. Now let's talk about this. Some of the trends that we see, or I've seen over the past several years. You'll typically have two different approaches. A lot of our customers right now, the company I have, they have limited configurations. It's a really simple out-of-the-box solution. It's up within hours. It's really low cost. The point of that is you want to have quick penetration. If not, you're going to go out of business. They rely upon volume instead of profit per deal to be able to keep the doors open. A lot of them take this approach because this approach is more difficult. This is the approach that I usually take because the profit margins are significantly different. And they're both very viable options, but typically when you have a system that offers greater flexibility in configuration, you're going to get larger deals. Larger deals are going to obviously result in larger profit margins, give you access to bigger clients, things of that nature. Just in my industry alone, we compete with a lot of other community companies out there. Your typical community with most of my competitors right around $35,000 to $40,000. I'm getting away with charging $250,000. Big difference. My profit margin is about 88%. So it gives you an idea. Their profit margins are right about 25%. Now, typically there is a convergence between these two. Time usually repeats itself. The patterns, I should say, usually repeat themselves over time. And ultimately, the convergence is you find the systems coming together with greater flexibility and lower costs. So companies like mine, over time, are forced to lower their prices. The other ones usually do end up raising their prices a little bit. They add a little bit more functionality. Companies like mine are trying to back off and kind of change strategies. But they usually end up coming together. A couple other items. How are we doing on time? A couple other items here. In terms of the delivery platform, if you're going out for VC, one of the hot words right now is SaaS, Service as a Software. This is one of the things that VC love right now. That may change in the next couple of years, but it's proven to be a very good model. Who here knows probably one of the preeminent examples of a SaaS model in a company? Bingo, Salesforce.com. If you want to learn more about SaaS in action as a successful example, go study Salesforce.com. They are a CRM that dominates the market, and it's a great way to do it. Basically, for those of you who don't know, instead of having the software come to you on a disk and you install it on the servers in your offices, they host it for you. It's a model that we take. We don't do any actual installation on our client sites. Excuse me. There's a lot of advantages to that because when it comes time for maintenance, we don't have to send out a bunch of software and help a bunch of our customers do this manually. We just go on the server and do it ourselves. We do it remotely from our offices. Our servers are located in Southern California. We're here in Provo. We just fire up the computer and do it ourselves.
Well, that was my question. I was going to ask you, SaaS models, you have all the information on your own server, it's just web-based.
It is just web-based. Well, it's a co-ownership typically, but the servers are under your control and your power. Legally, they own it, and you partition it, you do all that stuff, but it is on your machines. John in the back. I'm sorry, yes. Should have thought of that. The question was, with a SaaS model, do you host it? And the answer is yes, you host it. Now, there's hybrid models coming out that I'm starting to see. SaaS, the pure model with the SaaS is that users come on, they typically will pay with a PO or a credit card, they get just a number of user licenses they need, and they're able to turn the service on or off, and it's kind of a service. It's not the traditional software, but for pragmatic people, it's software that's just hosted on someone else's servers. But there's some interesting variations of that coming out, but that's a good one that you need to be knowing about. The next one, that's kind of in the last of this course of subject, is the API. Do you all know what an API is? No? Okay. Well, an API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's simply a toolkit that allows other programmers to be able to build applications against your code. Now, the question nowadays is free or paid. Facebook was a big advocate of this because they wanted to drive user-centric innovation. They made their API available for free. That's why we have so many Facebook apps out there, because you can get that API and you just do all great stuff with it. Up to now, you can spend upwards of $30,000, $40,000 on an API, depending upon the company, just to get that toolkit so that you can integrate two systems with each other. The trend seems to be allowing it to go out there for free. It's kind of a gamble, but the benefits seem to pay for itself. So another question to ask is about the API. You'll impress your new employer immensely. Now, you all are facing an interesting transition in time, because for the most part, my generation, as you took a look at what kind of hardware was going to be used to use your technology, it was one of these. It was a desktop or a laptop. That may not be the case for you. How many of you have one of these? These little things are amazing. A little iPod. You know, BlackBerry's pretty good. I had a deathbed conversion just about a year, well, not even a year ago, 6 months ago. I started to use all the Mac stuff. Amazing little tools. When I was in New York for the conference, the Web 2.0 conference, I couldn't get connectivity on my internet or on my laptop. I conducted entire weeks worth of business on this thing. As you all know, this is a miniature computer. It does everything. I can draft documents. I can do everything on this thing. Now, there are some limitations, and yes, it's kind of a pain to type, but let's face it, most people within your generation and younger can text faster than I can type. So there's some interesting applications there. Some of the other factors that are going into play that you should be aware of. I mean, you've seen the television commercials. A lot of the carriers are now starting to offer unlimited texting, unlimited phone for like $99 a month or something like that. It's a flat rate. That is another piece of the puzzle that's facilitating the transfer to more people starting to use these. In my sales force, typically what we do in the past, because my sales guys are on the road a lot, we'll have this, we'll be in an airport, we'll be at a Starbucks coffee or someplace where they got free Wi-Fi, and we'll sit down, we'll answer emails, we'll draft cost proposals, we'll do all the things that we need to be doing. But in reality, we can start doing it on this a lot easier. So I think you're going to start to see not the replacement, but a lot more people using this. And so definitely whatever application that you're looking at needs to be accessible by a handheld. Oh, one more thought I wanted to talk about. History does seem to be repeating itself a little bit here. We talked back in the 80s when Bill Gates released the source code for DOS. The initial thrust is a lot of gaming applications. How many of you have been to the App Store for Apple? And how many have downloaded an application? How many of those applications were not games? How many? 1, 2, 3. Kind of gives you an idea. History is repeating itself. There's an initial thrust of a lot of apps that are designed for the iPhone. They're games. They're productivity killers if you're an employer. But what we're starting to see is business applications starting to come out. Salesforce.com is looking at putting an application out on this thing, which I can't wait because I want my guys to use it. Let's see here. Another thing. My generation also focused pretty much in the United States. If you're here in the United States, for the most part, you wanted to focus on the United States as a market. We're not the top dog anymore. Take a look at the Wall Street Journal. I mean, our economy is in the worst condition it's in since my grandparents' generation. Where's the money? There are parts of this country that are not in the toilet right now with their economies. Dubai, Brazil's got a lot of oil money right now. Australia's doing really good. Then you have this little country called China that is emerging as a world leader. They're putting people up in space, for crying out loud. So you take a look at not only where the markets are. Over here on the left-hand side, you have internet users. Now, I couldn't find anything for 2008, but for 2007, we're looking at about 1.3 billion people that have access to internet. On the right-hand side are mobile subscribers, 3.3 billion. And nowadays, most phones come with internet accessibility. So, if you're looking at creating a quick market grab, providing an application over the phone may be the way to do it. But it's something you certainly need to be aware of and taken seriously. This next one is just kind of starting to wrap up here. Here's a hodgepodge of some of the additional observations I had from Web 2.0. You need more than just cool ideas. You need a sound business model. When I was talking to the reporters there at Web 2.0, we talked about, I think I mentioned it earlier, when Google decides to go out and to provide free community tools, most of my competition will dry up and go away overnight because they don't have a real sound business model behind them. I made some changes that were not saved on here. Sorry about that. The next one that should be there, which is not, is don't limit yourself to competing in just the Web 2.0 space. Meaning, if you're going to go out and do an e-business, that doesn't necessarily mean just Web 2.0. There's a lot of e-businesses out there. I mentioned one of them, e-learning. That's the other one that I compete in. In fact, one of the reasons why we've been so successful is that we don't position ourselves in the Web 2.0 industry. We position ourselves as the latest and greatest e-learning platform for businesses that's on the market. And that's how the media is perceiving it, because that's kind of how we're spinning it. But you're looking at a couple $100 million market in Web 2.0 versus a $3.3 billion market in e-learning. We're going where the money is. Next one. One of the things that Web 2.0 is lacking right now, and this is by the vendor's own submission, it's amazing how open they are when you turn your badge around, you don't show your competitor. They are admittedly failing when it comes to the reporting services. Now, the whole promise and premise of Web 2.0 is that you can use it to really understand what your customers are talking about, when they're complaining, when they're finding problems, how they're using your solution. It was supposed to be an online way to really get involved in the conversation, to get really actionable market data. But if that's the case, how come the reporting services are so lousy? That's why we have a SQL Server backend, in our case, to be able to collect that data so we can provide very actionable data to managers out there. One of the things that you need to be paying an awful lot of attention to right now is the technology that your company is providing, or the one that you're being recruited with, is a product a must-have or is it a luxury? 2 minutes? Then if you've got just 2 minutes, let's do this then. In terms of the future of Web 2.0 and the general feeling, is it going to survive or not? I thought this was an interesting quote. Now, this is the same person from Gartner I talked about a little earlier, wherein he said 50% of the Fortune 500 initiatives in the social media are going to fail. The reporter then went on to ask the analyst, well, does this mean that this market's going to go away because of the bad economy? Look at his report, or his response. He feels that the social media is a lifeline to the client. You don't ruin your customers, and your spirit of customer is probably the only thing you have. It's not going away. It's just dramatically changing. So the main thing is, if you're going to be looking at a social media kind of a venture to get involved with, you got to make sure there's a sound business model behind it, and that the value is a very sound business value to your common everyday kind of person, not something that only an early adopter could appreciate. Lastly, here are things that I think, if you guys do not, or if you're not on Twitter, you're not on Facebook, you really need to be. And these are the people you need to follow. Now, I follow a very long list of people to try and keep my pulse on what's going on in the market. These are guys that are all out of the Bay Area, principally San Francisco, and the information you get from them is minutes old. Now, there's a lot you could be following, but if you're not following anybody, here's a good place to start. I would recommend that you follow all of these guys. And then next, if you're serious about e-business and getting into one, sign up for Marketing Vox, just marketingvox.com. It's a free newsletter that you get daily. You get news from them before it's news. They have a great bunch of snoopy reporters that go out and search the blogs, and they're able to find interesting information and talk about big corporate moves before the press release is even launched. So they're a great source for very cutting-edge information. I use them a lot, as well as some others, but I use these guys principally in the business decisions that I make. I don't have time, but again, Charlene Lee, Jeremiah Owang, Robert Scoble, and Guy Kawasaki are all very good ones that you should be following on Twitter and Facebook. I think my time is up, right? Thank you.